Good evening, class. We're going to kind of go through, we went through part one of who was Frederick Taylor, and tonight we're going to, I guess, go through a summary of the text that, again, I've loaded out there on Canvas. It's PDF for it's a free version. Here's what I can't even say hardbound, it's a paperback version, but here's what the book would look like if you bought it on the internet. And tonight, so we're going to talk about, we're just going to summarize and at kind of a high level. I'm not going to get into a lot of the details. Main thing, I just want everybody in this class to understand the importance of Frederick Taylor and the importance of Taylorism, back in the early 1900s, and even look at how Taylorism still transcends today. If I had a professor at Ohio State that I didn't have that many management classes. I was, more on the finance and economic side, but I did take a couple of management classes, and I had one talk about, basically saying it's really impossible to study management theory without understanding. He talked about the father of scientific, management. He talked about Frederick Winslow Taylor, and we spent, I don't remember how long, it seemed like an eternity talking about Taylor and talking about what he had done in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and how it's still applied, especially in industrial and manufacturing arenas. And as a graduate student, it was a little hard to I guess connect the dots on it, but once you got out into the real world and get your first job or two, and especially if you start moving up the chain, up the management chain, you start to reflect back and you start to see that, well, Dr. So-and-so at Ohio State wasn't completely off his nut. I mean, this Frederick Taylor he had some pretty good ideas and they still apply today. And that's what I'm trying to pass on to you as graduate students may not be, your cup of tea now, and it may be a little difficult to understand. And then, yeah, the book, it's an easy read, but it may be at a level of prose that maybe you're not used to reading, or maybe not a level of prose you don't like. But still, there's some really great nuggets in that text, and you can use them definitely to your advantage as you start moving up the management chain. It's the four principles, and we went through them briefly in the first segment, but principle number one: develop a science for each element of work. And then he says scientifically select, train, teach, and develop the worker. Number three is cooperate with the worker. And number four is divide the work and responsibility. And when we think about, Taylor, you might think after reading the book that at least individuals in the late 1800s, early 1900s, sometimes wonder if Taylor wasn't just usually misunderstood during his heyday. But Taylorism is a key role in understanding worker management relations, and that still is definitely a situation of today. And the philosophy behind Taylorism, it emphasizes harmonious relations between workers and management. Remember, Taylor was trying to define the relationship between labor and capital. And if we think about what we talked about earlier in the last segment, it was like Taylor's rationale was if the worker was inefficient, or if the worker was soldiering, it led him to believe that if the worker was inefficient, then the use of capital stock or use of machines would probably be inefficient too. One of the best ways to complete task was driven by empirical study, and he was definitely a student of empirical study. And if you look at the first paragraph, basically the first sentence in the book of chapter one, it's, Taylor starts out with the principal object of management should be to secure the maximum prosperity of the employer coupled with the maximum prosperity of each employee. Some people have, especially students, when I talk to them, have a difficult time getting their arms around that one sentence, that first paragraph in chapter one. But if you step back and think about it, Taylor had the right idea. Take care of the employee, and the employee takes care of the employer. And it goes back to his emphasis on harmonious relations between workers and management. And his rationale for reaching this maximum prosperity, the organization employees work together, maximize the effort of each other, and be compensated for their efforts according to everyone's best interest. Again, relationship between employees and employer, worker and management. Workers could benefit from higher wages, shorter working hours, better working and home life balance. And, step back and think about it. If you're more efficient, you can be more productive in fewer hours during the day. And that's going to benefit not only the employee, but it's going to benefit the employer. Organizations should have welcomed Taylorism with open arms. They should have readily embraced it, because from an organization's perspective, now they're talking about market penetration and presence, higher profits, because remember, the profit function is revenue minus cost. Attract more skilled workers, and as long as your workforce is maximizing, again, the marginal product of labor. The more efficient the workers are, the higher the marginal product of labor, the lower the overall cost. And if you can lower the overall cost and be more productive at the same time, even given the same revenue level, it's going to drive profits. Again, that goes back to Taylorism and the theory, or Taylor's theory, let's say, of prosperity for the employee and prosperity for the employer. And Taylorism, it's based on worker focused on labor, insufficient capacity, and or education. And I think that was one thing that drove Taylor was what was the level of we'll call it human capital. I doubt he thought of it in terms of human capital, but in today's nomenclature, we're thinking in terms of human capital. Managers were focused, held accountable for performance and optimization of metrics. Workers were taught, trained, received help, direction from managers, and not left to their own devices. And fourthly, personal cooperation between workers and management produced maximum efficiency and drove the essence of modern scientific task management. Again, you're talking about, and I think if you kind of read through it, sometimes I wonder as you read through the text of all of these four principles, and it doesn't matter how you phrase them, they're still talking about the same four principles. Was Taylor more focused on the scientific piece of it, or was he more focused on the development of human capital? Because if you think in terms of developing your human capital, they are higher skilled, better trained. They should be able to perform more efficiently. More efficiently drives down cost. Drive down cost increases profit margins, and that leads back to prosperity for the employer and the employee. Taylorism, especially Taylor himself, was painted somewhat as a cold, impersonal, and was that due to his empirical nature, or the empirical basis of his theory and the empirical basis of the text that he wrote? He had good intentions for workers and organizations, but sometimes was it an issue with just poor application? Again, Taylor focused on efficiency. He focused on marginal product of labor. He I guess, coined the phrase of soldiering, and it was because soldiering implied that employees or workers were not working up to full capacity. And if the theory of Taylorism is accurate, then you might be able to tie it back to poor application. And the first aspect of potential poor application, employees incorrectly believing that greater productivity would result in lost jobs. And go back to your micro classes, your microeconomics classes. That's one of the things they talk about in microeconomics classes is increased efficiency and increased productivity increases the marginal product of labor. And it doesn't necessarily mean fewer jobs. In most cases, it means more jobs because the higher the product of labor, the higher the marginal product of labor, the more employees a company will try to add because you're getting more productivity at a lesser cost. And then Taylor, when he started talking about inefficiency within the workers, that's when he starts bringing up soldiering. And there's natural soldiering, and it's inborn in human behavior to avoid work. Then there's systematic soldiering. It's ill-defined or ill-designed workspace that allows workers to control their own pace. When you go back to natural soldiering, if you get out on the internet, there was a sitcom, I think it was Dobie Gillis, but the guy that played Gilligan on Gilligan's Island was a kind of a beatnik or a hippie in that era, and he was Maynard G. Krebs, and he was so opposed to work that every time he thought there was going to be an opportunity to work, it was like, "What, me work?" And he would disappear. So that goes back to the human nature of work. Just look around you. Think about the classes you're in. You have some students that are trying to achieve, and some students that they're just there. They just want a degree and get out the door. You have other students that want to be successful and succeed. If you've ever been in a workplace, in a work environment, think about what the environment is. You have some employees that are trying to better themselves, trying to improve their situation at work. You have some that, they're just freeloaders. They're just, trying to ride through on somebody's coattail, just trying to collect a check. They want to come into work, do as little as possible, go home at night, and collect a check every 2 weeks. So soldiering, whether it's natural or systematic, it's still within the workplace today. There's a lot of I guess social media out there that are talking about this latest group of individuals coming out of college, and they don't want to work. There's you've got all these people complaining about having to work an 8-hour day, and it's cutting into their social life, and they can't go to the gym, and they can't watch TV, and they can't play their video games, and just on and on. And so if you think if you think soldiering has disappeared, don't kid yourself. Soldiering is still there. The second potential reason or responsive for poor application is defective systems of management that work against employees and productivity. And again, if you've been out of the workplace, I can't imagine you're not witnessing this even in today's world, in today's environment, in today's workplace, because it still exists. Think about the management systems that you've worked in. I think about all the ones I've worked in over the years, and some health plans I've worked for had an excellent management system. Other health plans, it was almost like they incentivized soldiering. The policies and procedures were vague and ambiguous, and the management team weren't really pressed to do, to achieve above and beyond because they didn't impress the employees that reported to them. So it's still in the workplace today. An inability to leave behind traditional and habitually inefficient procedures. Think about those of you that, if you have been in management positions, you will have heard as you walk in, and I've heard it at most stops that I've been in along the career, along my healthcare career. One of the first things you hear is, "Well, we've always done it this way. Why should we change? This works really well. This doesn't make sense. Why should we change? Why should we do it this way?" If you haven't heard that refrain in the past, and if you get into the workplace and you try to climb that corporate ladder, you try to move up the management chain, I will guarantee you will hear it. And again, it's poor application. And then lastly, I think sometimes the poor application is nothing more than driving workers against their wishes and without much increase in pay to work much harder instead of gradually teaching and leading them toward new methods. And I see this a lot. You have a new say vice president comes in, and they think they have to prove themselves, and they start rolling out metrics that they expect everybody to work toward. And you look at the metrics and you can tell they're not realistic, they're not feasible. Yes, they're aggressive, and if we can complete them, it's going to make the new leader going to make them look like they are the greatest thing since sliced bread. But at the same time, you're going to get pushback from employees, because if you're asking them to work more hours during the day without some additional level of compensation or some rationale as to why it's not going to benefit them long term, they may not understand it in the short term, but if you can provide a benefit long term, it changes the whole approach. So as you move into management, think about Taylor's approach, and think about some of these application issues that might have constrained the adoption or the acceptance of Taylor's 4 principles of scientific management. In the early 1900s, and you'll get into this as you read the book, management involved offering incentive-based pay, or per unit pay, or per widget pay, and it was considered initiative and incentive pays. Taylorism argued that initiative is rare from workers and insisted scientific method drives efficiency and performance. So in Taylor's mind, just in watching the workers and conducting his empirical studies, his rationale or his conclusion was there's not a lot of incentive, among the workers. And it's through scientific method or scientific management that you can develop metrics that you can use to incentivize and motivate workers to perform at a higher level. And with this productivity at a higher level, then the workers, in response to producing at a higher level, should, at least in theory, should expect a higher wage, or at least after a certain amount of time. But just think about annual bonuses. At some point, if workers know that there is a potential for an annual bonus, then they do tend to work a little harder. They do tend to strive to meet goals. Even if they are extremely aggressive, they will put forth more effort to meet those goals if they think there is some financial value at the end. Taylor's empirical and scientific theories provided 4 principles of scientific management. And we'll kind of go through these in a little different, and maybe in a little more detail. But, his first principle of scientific of management was develop a science for each element of work. And Taylor strives to determine the best day's work that a worker could properly do year in and year out and still thrive. Taylor knew that it wasn't a sprint. He was thinking in terms more of a marathon race than a sprint. He was trying to develop the management metrics using empirical studies to drive the metrics. And it talks about in the book him sitting there timing each component of a test using a stopwatch. So again, not a sprint, but a marathon. And he's looking at long-term productivity for the workers in the organization. He's focused on trying to go through a paradigm shift in the short run with the long-term goal in mind of not only increased productivity, but sustainable increased productivity. Management should gather objective data on the work. They should perform studies and experiments, and they should standardize policies and procedures based on the results. And if you think of it in that vein, think about if you've ever worked in a company that used Lean Six Sigma as a process improvement. And that's what Lean Six Sigma is doing. They're gathering information, they're reviewing the information, they're sitting down and going through policies and procedures and processes step by step in order to improve productivity, improve efficiency using the skill set that's developed through Lean Six Sigma processes. And one of the approaches that Taylor used in the empirical study aspect of it to gather objective data on work, first he identified first-class laborers to perform a given task, and he would pay them extra wages. He would examine, test them to ensure that they were working to the best of their ability at all times, using a stopwatch to time them in performing the task as he was experimenting with different tools, procedures, spacing the work intervals to determine the most optimal productivity. Optimal tools and procedures would determine standards for a given task. So Taylor, as you kind of read through the text, you sometimes wonder if Taylor, through selecting first-class workers, so he's wanting to select the cream of the crop on the workers for a given task. He's offering to pay them a little extra wages. So the financial incentive and the fact that he is selecting the cream of the crop on the workers, is he actually skewing his empirical study toward optimal efficiency? And from my perspective, that's okay, because here's optimal efficiency. Here is the best of the best. And once you determine the best of the best, then at that point, you want to take and move everybody as many workers as possible toward that best of the best. So you're going to actually raise the mean by incentivizing and working toward your entire workforce, moving toward that optimal workforce that Taylor has determined by selecting best of the best and paying them a few extra dollars in wages. The second objective of Taylorism, where he talks about scientifically select, train, teach, and develop the workers, you select the worker especially suited for the work based on the science or based on the empirical evidence. Some workers, I go back to, again, most of my experiences in healthcare, so I go back to healthcare. If I've got in my payment integrity team that I had at Blue Cross Blue Shield, basically everybody there was either an analyst, subject matter expert, or a clinician. And I found that Um, Clinicians do an exceptional job when it comes to reviewing medical records, um, looking at the rationale behind services that are provided to individuals, when they go to see their healthcare provider. But when it comes to analytical work, the clinicians, the nurses, they just weren't that well suited for analytical work. And the flip side of that, what my analysts did an exceptionally good job, and they were extremely proficient at the analytical piece, especially writing code. But when it came to the clinical and the medical aspect of it, didn't even want to fool with it. It's like, and so it goes back to Taylor. You're selecting when you have a team to manage on your own. I think it is important to start to look at the tasks that had to be performed and select those workers that do the best in those tasks. Going to Starbucks. You walk in the door at Starbucks and you've got somebody really perky at the cash register, take your order. And then, so I'm standing here in kind of the middle of the activity at Starbucks at the cash register. Down here to my left, at least the most of the Starbucks I've been in, down to my left are, the coffee baristas, the individuals doing the tea and the hot chocolate and the cocoa and all of that stuff. Down here on the right are the individuals that are doing the sandwiches. They've got the microwave down there. They're pulling those sandwiches out there, microwaving. They've got the muffins and the cakes and stuff, and the cases here. And those individuals have been allocated to those tasks. They may not think that they're using Taylorism to allocate to those tasks, but those workers or those resources have been allocated to specific tasks because either A, they like the task, or B, they're extremely efficient at those tasks. And that goes back to Taylorism and taking and identifying the task and allocating those workers to certain tasks in which they can be the most efficient. The selection and correct assignment were critical components in the theory of scientific management. The critical components to me in just managing a team in the workforce today. Workers performing below standards should be guided, helped, encouraged to become proficient at their jobs. Again, we're going back to human capital. Through human capital, training, and education, you can take somebody that's not very efficient at making a cup of coffee in Starbucks and at least potentially turn them into a great coffee barista. If after other study and analysis, it was found that the worker couldn't perform up to standards, then they should be shifted to another job class, that they were mentally and physically better suited. And that makes sense too. If they can't make it, if they have difficulty being that coffee barista, then maybe you shift them back to running the cash register. Or maybe you shift them back to putting sandwiches in a microwave. You put a sandwich in the microwave, you coat it in, when it goes off, you put it in a bag and they take it down to the customer. Customer orders a muffin. They reach in the case, they take the muffin, they put it in the bag and take it to the customer. There is a allocation of resources, and it doesn't matter whether it's Starbucks, whether it's McDonald's, Burger King. All of the workers are being allocated to tasks within that production function or that production process based on their ability to perform that task at a efficient level. Training and development were connected to the selection and the assignment process. Impossible to hurry. And this is one thing that you found is, as you kind of read through Taylor's text, it's impossible to hurry beyond a certain speed. Gradual implementation of a new science to a job has to be a step-by-step process. Train workers one at a time. But once you get to like a quarter or a third have been trained, then a rapid progress can be made. And that's true of any job. Get one or two individuals. It goes back to when we talked about the Klan in one of the earlier modules in this class. You've got people when you've got that Klan mentality, and you've got people in that, you've got leaders and you've got individuals that are willing to help the new employees, bring them up to speed, whether it's an onboarding process or they're just changing jobs within a company. If you've got leaders in a group that can help train and educate, you can move along, especially implementing a new process. You can move it along at a much faster rate. The third principle, it's cooperate with the workers. And it gives it, and in the text, it talks about the Bethlehem Steel example. And it's, you develop the science of laboring. What you're doing is you allocate the workers into kind of four subsets in his text. In the first subset, they're developing the science of labor. The second subset, it's skilled laborers who are teachers that can train and guide workers in their work. And then the third subset is tool room workers providing proper instruments and keeping them in perfect order. And then the fourth subset are clerks who plan the work and move workers from one place to another. And that's how Taylorism is cooperating with the workers. You're allocating those workers to essentially teams. And by allocating those workers to teams where they fit the task most efficiently, then you're going to have more productivity at a higher efficiency rate. More efficiency, more productivity drives profits, and profits drive prosperity for the workers and the organization. And then it talks about that, his cooperation between management and workers, and the distribution, allocates each worker. They perform the function with which they're best suited, preserves their own individuality, loses none of the, preserves their own individuality, and it loses none of the originality and initiative. And lastly, it's controlled by the workers harmoniously with other workers. So when you've got a delegation of responsibility within a team, you can see how everybody within that team is going to perform at a higher level. And then the fourth example is divide the work and responsibility. And basically in his text, he says an individual can't be at a desk and at a machine at the same time. I mean, that's not earth-shattering, but and that's how Taylor is developing this fourth principle. One to plan and one to execute. Management to plan, worker to execute. Almost equal division of responsibility and work between management and worker. Again, at this point, management is responsible. They're accepting responsibility for meeting the efficiency and productivity metrics. The workers are responsible and accepting that responsibility to work at a speed that's going to drive efficiency and productivity. And then it goes in and spends a few minutes talking about, there's some information in there that you'll get as you read the text, but it's talking about bricklaying study. And management's responsibility was to ensure cooperation between all parties. Management was responsible for making sure the workers had the correct tools, they were operating under the right conditions, according to the proper policies and procedures, and informed of pace and progress. So that was the management's responsibility, and it's a very similar responsibility that you will face once you get out into the workforce, especially if you start to go up and try to climb that management chain and that management ladder of the corporation. I mean, I think back to Buffalo and the payment integrity team. It was my responsibility as a director to ensure that the workers had the correct tools. Did they have the correct computer access? Did they have the correct software packages? Did they have the correct medical information? Did they have access um, to to other teams or other functional areas when they had questions? So my responsibility to make sure they had the correct tools. I had to also make sure they were operating under the right conditions. I was also, when I'm talking about right conditions, did I have the work allocated according to the skill sets that I had? Could I have allocated the work across the team in a more efficient manner? That was my responsibility as a director. I was also tasked with ensuring that they were working according to the proper policies and procedures. We had policies and procedures in place for all of the tasks that they did. I had to ensure that they had access to it. I had to ensure that the individuals working those tasks understood the policies and procedures and knew how to interact with the policies and procedures in order to ensure that we were hitting our financial and operational metrics. And lastly, when it came to informing of pace and progress, I had monthly meetings with everybody in the payment integrity team, and we talked about here's where we are on our financial metrics, here's where we are on our operational metrics. If we're not hitting them, what do we need to do to be more effective, be more efficient, be more productive? And you will face these similar challenges once you get out into the workforce. And when you do, think about Taylor. Think about Taylorism. Is there something from this little 70-some page textbook or this little 70-some page book that you can glean to help you be a better manager? Management and workers working side by side. Reward should come soon after the work is done. Communication and award should be daily. So Taylor thought communication and award should be daily, and it should be daily if you have the ability to provide that type of information on a daily basis. Whatever you do, if you're talking about kind of rewarding employees, it should be done as soon as the work, as quickly as the work is completed as possible. Encouragement. Taylor thought you should provide encouragement every hour. And maybe if you're working in manufacturing or in an industrial situation, that's possible. Sometimes, though, especially in healthcare, it's difficult. Even I tried to walk the floor as much as possible, but I couldn't walk the floor and talk to everybody every hour. He was ahead of his time in understanding the reward relationship motivation between workers and management. Workers lose motivation if rewards are too far in the future. And that was always an issue in the healthcare environment is the financial rewards. So you worked the calendar year, you had your goals at January the 1st of a given year, and at December the 31st of that given year, you were evaluated. Your pay increases, your stock options, if you were going to get them, depending on whether you were for profit or not for profit, your bonuses usually were even though you were evaluated in January, February, you usually didn't receive that financial boost until March. They usually tried to get it to you by March the 15th, at least in most companies I've worked for. That seemed to be the drop dead date for getting that out to everybody. So you worked an entire year, and then you're going to have to wait 2.5 months before you get your reward or your bonus or your pay increases. And even though you're telling individuals, even though individuals know based on the metrics as you go through the year, they have an idea of what it's going to be, or at least have a pretty good idea of what the level will be. But it is a long time to wait between the time that the job is completed or the time the projects aren't completed and the time that you get that reward. To kind of summarize the text, and again, I hope you all read it because it has helped me um, along the way more than I would have ever envisioned when I was struggling through it in graduate school. So I certainly suggest that you read the text and um, take some notes and kind of keep it with you once you get out into the workforce because you'll be surprised how beneficial it'll be going forward. Because try to summarize it, Taylor's contributions may have been misunderstood, and definitely they were ahead of their time. He may not have been a tactful writer, but his intentions were pretty honorable. His intentions were good. He was trying to ensure that there was a maximization of prosperity, not only for the organization and the employers, but for the employees as well. Again, not only did he try to drive maximum prosperity for the organization and the worker, but he sought maximum prosperity for the consumers. He always liked to use science instead of a rule of thumb. He liked harmony instead of discord, cooperation rather than individualism. He liked to maximize output and not restrict output. And he'd like to develop each worker to the greatest efficiency and ability and skill level possible. So again, that's an overview. We've spent 2 modules. First talked about kind of Taylor's a man and kind of some of the earlier things he did. Went through a quick summary of the text, but again, I have found it over the years to be of all the things I read in graduate school, it may have been one that's you find that maybe the most beneficial to you, especially if you want to go the management route. And most individuals that are working toward a master's degree in a particular discipline have their sights more than likely set on a career in management. So I would always keep that book close at hand and see if it doesn't help you going forward. Thanks for joining, and we'll talk later.